Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special night, a very important night. And I think as Tom Horn and I have experienced over the last years, we've been doing radio interviews together and writing both together and apart. We find that the timing that the Lord places us on the radio is usually at a turning point in history. Now, Tom and Chris Putnam has just come out with their new book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. Chapter 17 is posted on Tom's website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and I think everyone should absolutely be impressed with the lateness of the hour, because this is stuff that everyone has been teaching for literally over 100 years. Obviously, in modern Christendom, everybody waited for the appointed time. It's the appointed time, and I want Tom to have maximum time tonight. When you're going to send your questions, you can send them in to Bruce. Bruce can ask the questions of either Tom or myself, but please direct the ones about Petrus Romanus and everything to Tom Horn. Tonight we're going to hit the Vatican. The first hour we're going to hit the Vatican and alien disclosure. Tom sent me an email, and based on Donna's response, that's where the interest lies, and we'll, as usual, all gain an infinite new understanding of this amazing research and what we're going to basically be looking forward to in the very short period. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve. Great to be back on the show with you guys again. Always my absolute pleasure. It humbles me to get to be with great minds like yourself and to be able to have these conversations concerning the Vatican, the alien connection, what, if anything, it has to do with the arrival of Petrus Romanus. And you're right, and Donna was right. And I would say probably at least 10 to 1, Steve, and we got a lot of follow-up email following that last show that we did when Chris Putnam was on with us, and 10 to 1, it had to be people wanting to know more about the sources that I was citing concerning the Vatican, and of course Donna had to create just kind of a copy and paste email to send to all those people that wanted to go for themselves and read those documents about the Vatican's position on ET and how that might change religion, and we'll be talking about all that tonight. I will give you an update. We heard just today that the books Petrus Romanus are shipping today, so we're hoping by or before the 15th that we will have those in the warehouse, in our local warehouse here in Missouri, as well as the 2 warehouses for the distributor. And this book has already broke all sales records, all previous sales records for our distributor on pre-sales of a book have been broken by this book, Petrus Romanus. And so that illustrates the interest around the world that people have right now, the questions they have, Steve, for the kind of issues that you are brave enough to tackle. The people are there that have the questions, want to know what's going on in the world.
Well, again, Tom, I think this is very telling and truly compelling that years ago, even discussion of aliens would have been relegated and delegated to the realm of deliverance and the rites of exorcism. Now it seems like what is absolutely mind-boggling in the years that you and I have been doing talk radio together, me interviewing you, the thing that's fascinating is the acceleration. Now, you know me, I like to go to the bottom line. Let's start out with the alien disclosure and how that's going to affect mainstream Catholics, because it's already a given that the Vatican has its own intelligence. They have their own telescopes. They know what's going on. They have been briefed. They're clued in. But how will they sell it, Tom Horn, to the faithful who, as I said, would basically consider this stuff of the devil? And, I want to address later, too, Tom, with you the fact that this good alien, bad alien thing, this is all playing out according to the Luciferians' plan for the ultimate deception. So can we get to that? You mind if we hit it that way first? We'll just deal with the Vatican's entire change of perspective. Go ahead, sir. The floor is yours.
And also, if we can, sometime tonight, let's give an update on the David Flynn collection. And I would even like, if possible, to quote some of David's research, because he touched on a lot of this material long before I did. In fact, David touched on a lot of this material long before a lot of us did. And I'd like to be able to honor him by making that point. Well, first of all, let me start out by talking about what's in the headlines this week. You probably have saw One of the headlines was Countdown to Discovery of Alien Life, Tens of Billions of Rocky Planets in Milky Way Habitable Zones. That was from the European Space Agency. And what they're talking about is how their HARPS Planet Finder, interesting name, huh? But their HARPS Planet Finder has proven to them within their own science that they're rocky planets, Earth-like planets, and planets that are not much bigger than Earth and that could host life are way more common in the habitable zones around faint red stars than what we ever believed before. In fact, the international team there in Europe estimates that there are tens of billions of planets just in the Milky Way galaxy, and probably hundreds, or at least 100, just inside the sun's immediate neighborhood. So now the odds of finding sentient, intelligent extraterrestrials just went into the stratosphere. And so now, of course, the scientific teams, the bodies, what they've got to try to determine is if they should try to send signals to some of these planets to make contact. There's some who believe that's not a very good idea. And if they get any kind of response, then in what ways should they maybe follow up with that? Well, on the heels of the European Space Agency's reports, there is a new article that's at Life Science tonight, Life Science, which I think is owned by Reuters. But in any case, it's posted over there tonight. We're going to post it at Raiders News Update tomorrow morning, and it's a feature article that's called If We Discover Aliens, What's Our Protocol for Making Contact? And there's some pretty amazing stuff in this article in the sense that they're saying, first of all, they're saying it's conceivable now, based on these recent discoveries, that humans could very soon come in contact with aliens, and furthermore, that life may even exist on Mars. It may exist on Europa, a moon of Jupiter. Europa, appears to have an underground ocean. And there is an astronomer from Pennsylvania State University by the name of Jacob Misra, who they quote in that article, and he's saying that there could be sentient life living in the underground ocean on Jupiter. So does this sound like the no-mo to anybody but me? And other possibilities he talks about. He says intelligent extraterrestrial beings may have traveled from a distant star system, and they've taken up residence in our solar system. They might, in fact, he says, be living in underground bases on Mars or the moon. Well, as I'm reading this stuff, knowing this is, this is Reuters, this is Life Science, this is not weekly world news, right? It makes me go back to something I was thinking about earlier this year, and that is, what is the real purpose of Curiosity, the rover that houses the Mars Science Laboratory, that's halfway to Mars right now? In fact, Curiosity, I guess this last Sunday, April the 1st, reached a milestone in that it passed the halfway point. It's traveling at something like 10,000 miles an hour to the red planet. But it's going to spend 2 years analyzing Mars around its landing site, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's what we're being told. But then you get these people that are academics, and some of them are members of NASA's astrobiology team, and they come out with statements like that there could be sentient life already on Mars living in underground cabins. I mean, is this guy just a fruitcake? And if so, why is he, the spokesman for Life Science and Reuters News? Well, it's very interesting times that we're living in. And what does this have to do with Petrus Romanus? What does this have to do with the Vatican? I'll tell you something that I haven't talked about this on radio anywhere, Steve. But this, from the beginning, this has been one of the creepiest ideas surrounding the arrival of Petrus Romanus, the false prophet, and any possible connection to the alien agenda. And this came to me when we were doing this research. Was there, related to Malachi Martin's vow, that an occult ritual was performed in 1963 at the Vatican and Target Chapel in South Carolina involving a woman for the purposes of pregnation, or possibly there was a young priest for the express purpose of instilling something within him of those priests that were there, but the whole purpose of it was to enthrone Lucifer over the Vatican, according to this Jesuit priest. And that all of that was connected in another book by Malachi Martin to a final conclave that would bring to the throne of Peter a pope under the control of Satan, the false prophet. And of course, according to the prophecy of the popes, the final conclave is the one following Benedict, which right now, according to the Vatican's own news sources, the College of Cardinals are preparing right now for the conclave that will elect his successor. But here's the creepy part of this, was in this ritual that Malachi Martin brought up. And if you read his books and his descriptions, there are parts of it that sound almost identical to alien abduction descriptions. You know how that some of the best researchers into the field of alien abduction have often made parallels to dark occultism, right?
Absolutely.
The rituals, the use of blood, the use of genetics, the use of menstrual fluids, the things that they do in occult black magic and in the black mass, and in some of Malachi's descriptions, sounds eerily like some of the same activity that happens in alien abduction phenomenon. And it came to me one day that the Vatican's interest right now in alien intelligence, and if you remember, who was it? Was it Balducci? It was one of the Catholics' own bishops some years ago who said that the Vatican was already in contact. Remember that? Was already interacting. You remember who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And you and I spoke of that years ago on the radio. And it's my contention, Tom, just to basically parenthetically insert something into this. Look, they already are in contact. We already have them, not on Mars or the moon. And somebody said, well, you know, Steve, it's not very far if you can make it to the Mars from some exoplanet to jump into the Earth's atmosphere or jump into the Earth's oceans. And Tom, over the years that I have been on talk radio and even before that writing about this stuff, I can't tell you how many people I've personally talked to that have been in the most secret government programs, including Phil Schneider 5 days before he was murdered, a guy by the name of Tex Armstrong who absolutely validated everything that I'd ever been told, and multiple generals and multiple intel agents. But you know what the common thread was in all these guys? They said it was something so not what you'd expect from intergalactic or interplanetary visitors. He said the occult emanations. He even told me about one guy that was present at Dulce, the underground base at Dulce, who was a Christian, and when he saw some of these entities in person now, he rebuked them in Jesus' name under his breath. And listen, a general told me this, active duty, no, friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. Mm-hmm. And they absolutely, the aliens demanded that this is interesting, Christians be present at Dulce when they cut their deal. And Dulce is just one of many alien hives that exist. So, saying all that, what I'm just saying is they're already, to amplify what you've said, look, they're already, they've met with the ambassadors, so the whole plan is, Tom, how do they, number one, as Catholics and as basically the keepers of the faith, how do they leak that into their believers? And obviously there are different Catholics, the old school Catholics versus the new school. Mm-hmm. So, and this isn't just a Catholic issue. This is a total deception of the whole world issue. So how are they going to do that, in your opinion? Because, look, they've already given us enough stuff. Isn't it amazing? You really think that they didn't know about all those planets that exist? You think they didn't know about Europa and they didn't know about the Martian caverns and all that stuff? We get to David Flynn. I mean, David Flynn wrote the premier piece on Cydonia, and that Jonathan Swift knew about Phobos and Deimos, and even the Russians talking about Phobos being artificial. All these things don't just go back to the invention of science fiction movies. They go back hundreds of years, and in the case we'll talk about later, in all the cave drawings and everything else on the aliens, the alien presence is absolutely astonishing, whether you go to the Australian outback or into Bryce Canyon, Utah, and you've got these petroglyphs, if you will, of guys in spacesuits and helmets, and they're usually 8 or 9 feet tall. So isn't it amazing now? I think what you've laid the best groundwork for, of anybody I've ever interviewed, is how everything, both religious, financial, philosophical, theological, all these points are coming together at this time.
And don't you think that, given what we know, and also, I guess, what we could suspect, that there would be reason to imagine that if, in fact, the Bishop of Rome, who said they were, years ago, that they were already involved in contact, interacting with, if you read, again, I'm not going to stay on Malachi Martin, but if you read his books, he was making a very specific case that there was an incarnation that was set to occur that would, in the final conclave, bring about an individual who essentially is not just under the control of Satan. He could even be in some aspect, not like the Antichrist, but in some reality, kind of a Satan incarnate. In other words, something entirely different about him. And that came back to me when I got to thinking about how the best researchers into alien abduction note these occult rituals. And years ago I did research in which I discovered, first of all, that most of the Vatican's astronomers that are mostly interested, including the newest ones, by the way, that are mostly interested in the alien phenomenon, also are certified exorcists. Isn't that a strange formula?
Absolutely.
The guys who are most called or intrigued or whatever in dealing with demons happen to also be the very ones that want to be astronomers and make contact with this other intelligence. But in any case, I discovered a long time ago that the ancient records, if you go back, you look at the records of the incubus, the succubus, there was always this collecting of human sperm by these night visitors or fluids from women, and they would, depending on whether it was incubus or succubus, they'd use it to impregnate a female host or to have sex with a male host, and how that all of that ancient language is identical in many ways to the testimonies of those who claim contact, and sounds also very much like what Malachi Martin had said. There's another thing that we won't go into, but it has to do with the medieval stories about the devil's mark, and how, according to the ancient beliefs, the devil would mark his victims for identification, and his marks were, scratches on them from a talon, they believed back then. The little straight scars, odd spots, typically in in their genitive areas, and same thing today. And what we now call alien abduction, we wouldn't call it the devil's mark, but you have the same kind of marks, the same kind of scratches. So something's been going on for a very long time, and it has an interest in creating. It has an interest in building a body or in altering a human body. And then, of course, the question is, for what purposes? Now, the Vatican's astronomers, so to get back on the European Space Agency and the Vatican, they're really excited about these developments, or at least now they can admit their excitement. And I don't know if you know who Daniel Sheehan is. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School. He's a professor of world politics or something at the University of California. But in the 1970s, he's a Jesuit, I think, and he was the general counsel to the United States Jesuit Office of Social Ministry in Washington, D.C. But what's important about him is that not only is he an intellectual, but he was a special consultant to the United States Congressional Research Office project on extraterrestrial intelligence that had been ordered and set up by President Jimmy Carter. I don't know if you recall that, but he was a special consultant to them for the Jesuits. And now, with what the Vatican's been saying, between Jose Funes and all these guys out there talking, he's writing quite a bit, and he's reminding people that it wasn't very long ago, a couple of years ago, when the Vatican actually called together a bunch of academics at the Vatican for consideration of the philosophical and the theological questions posed by the discovery of extraterrestrial life. You remember that? It was, I think, 2009, and the Pontifical Academy of Sciences there in Rome, Italy, they convened this 5-day conference. There was something like 30 world scientists that went there to the summer residence of Pope Benedict XVI's grounds, and they in the Pontifical Astronomical Observatory. I don't remember who all, but it was a conference that was called by the Vatican to ask astronomers and astrobiologists from the United States, France, Britain, Switzerland, Chile, to present to the Vatican's philosophers and theologians, and actually even just a number of the members of the Catholic hierarchy among the College of Cardinals, to have them to present to those members of the Catholic hierarchy what is the mounting evidence of the existence of sentient life on other planets outside of the solar system. Well, now that's what the public understood this meeting was all about. But what Sheehan is saying, and he would know, is that the principal purpose of the conference was to actually indoctrinate, help, adjust, introduce the leaders of the Catholic Church to prepare for the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence, technologically advanced, non-human, sentient civilization that is in the universe that evidently some in the Vatican were aware of, but many others were not. It's protected knowledge, right? You need above security clearance. The Vatican basically introduced what today in the U.S. we call above top secret security clearance. But at the conclusion of that Vatican conference, at the time, the Jesuit director of the Vatican Observatory, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, he convened a press conference, and I remembered it, but I didn't realize the coded language that he was used that has now been brought out by Daniel Sheehan, in which he said publicly, he had a press conference. It was an official press conference at the Vatican, and so whatever he said would be official language. It'd be approved by the Vatican. And he said the questions of life's origin and whether life exists elsewhere in the universe deserves serious attention and offers many philosophical and theological implications. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like much to start with, but that the term theology was raised as a topic that would need to be reconsidered as a result of this new knowledge of extraterrestrial intelligence was consistent with 1 year before that, when he was quoted in the official Vatican newspaper, you know, the what's it called, the El Osservatore or whatever it is, Romano, and he was quoted as saying that if other intelligent beings do exist elsewhere in our universe and they are discovered by us, then they too will have to be considered to be part of God's creation. Well, what Sheehan is saying is that on the face of it, that statement doesn't seem like an important event, but what is unbeknown to most of the non-Catholic world, at least, is that Funes' specific choice of words was a precise restatement, exact wording of a key aspect of the official Catholic Church's edict that was issued in 1277 by Bishop Tempier, the Bishop of Paris, in which the Catholic Church officially condemned St. Thomas Aquinas' theological proposition, I think it's proposition number 34, in which Aquinas had publicly asserted that the first cause, meaning God in Catholic theology, cannot possibly have created other worlds. That was officially condemned by the Catholic Church on the specific grounds that it would set limits on God's creative freedom and the idea that God might have other sentient creatures living in other places. Well, the precise words are those that were deliberately used by Father Funes in 2008. In other words, Funes was sending a specific message that the bulk of the world, guys like me, we would never catch what he had just done. But according to Daniel Sheehan, a Harvard Law School professor who's currently a professor of world politics at the University of California, and more specifically was the United States Jesuit of Office Social Ministry Council who worked with President Jimmy Carter on this subject matter. What he's saying is that Funes was sending a specific message that only Catholic scholars would get. Basically, the time is here. The time has arrived. So is he overstating the facts? I don't know. But to announce this new official policy of the Roman Catholic Church acknowledging the likelihood of the existence of extraterrestrial life elsewhere in the universe in 2009 seems really suspicious to me. The fact that the specific year 1277 Catholic edict that condemned the proposition of Thomas Aquinas that there couldn't be other worlds with intelligent life, that was used by church authorities, I don't know. I think he's right. I think there was something there, and now these words are pointing Catholic leadership to the idea that we've made contact with morally.
I think it's bigger than that, though, Tom. I truly do. Because in all of my conversations, and I'm talking 2 decades with people in the know, the whole plan is, and this is what the argument has been, will the Antichrist be a possessed human being, or will it be an alien with claims that they created even Jesus? There was, are you familiar with the term the aviary?
Yes.
Well, you remember their claims is they even have like the equivalent of the DROPA disc, DROPA discs, that would indicate that they have, if you will, their version of a video recording. And so I think it's this: how do they reconcile the God of the Bible and the aliens who are going to claim to be our, if you will, originators? In other words, first cause is, as to a Christian, obviously, and to those of us who believe that God literally spoke the worlds into existence. This was the issue that even Zecharia Sitchin wrestled with. He could never admit that the Anunnaki could be fallen angels or rebellious angels who were created by God with free moral choice, and yet all of his research, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, was both historically accurate, uniquely, how should I say this, researched, and you could only draw one conclusion. So how is it that, what is your opinion, Tom, based on what you're studying now? We've got obviously the final pope coming on. We've got the false prophet mentioned in the book of Revelation. We've got the Antichrist, the beast. We've got all these different people. But how are they going to swing, 1.2 billion or however many Catholics there are, to embrace this idea that there's no really, the God of the Bible was just a metaphor for our alien benefactors? I think, panspermia is the order of the day.
Well, that, and also, of course, the world could be shocked into going along with. Imagine, that you've got suddenly an armada of ships as big as the ones in that movie Independence Day that are hovering over the major cities of the world. People are going to quickly turn to the government and to who they consider to be their religious leaders for advice, and they'll pretty much step into lockstep, I believe.
Well, that's the answer. Yeah, that is the answer, in my opinion, and I think that you've brought that up in times past. Now we've seen, you can go on YouTube and you can see all the triangular-shaped aircraft or spacecraft that the Skunk Works has designed. And I want to give you a quote because I think it's so important that people understand this. Lockheed Skunk Works is the U.S. government contractor, big-time defense contractor that's had their secret stuff in the background developing it since Roswell. Reverse engineering alien stuff that's been found all over the world, and I've had special operations guys tell me that the focus and the maximum effort is spent in black projects is acquiring ancient technology and alien technology. So here's a quote. I know you've read this before, but he says, quote, "The former head, Ben Rich of Skunkworks, we already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects and would take an active God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." Now, this is the guy that was head of the most top secret, most, if you will, alien when I say alien technology was their forte, reverse engineering it. And interestingly enough, that was he died, I think, at the age of 69, and he died very shortly after coming clean with that. By the way, there's a video on YouTube of that entire speech. So given the fact that you said something critical, Tom, we're going to be shocked into it. YouTube's now showing base ships of horrific size that are basically drawing drawing their energy from the sun. NASA's stopping all of their video footage when anything of, let's say, this extraterrestrial origin shows up. And then we've got the Planet X block up. But all this stuff, here's what I want to say. I want to bring it into what you're talking about. Petrus Romanus, whoever is, and you're going to share that with who you guys think it is, but he's already prepped and knows all this stuff. And if it's so, how should I say this, so time sensitive as you and Chris have put in your book, then I think everybody who's listening to this show worldwide had better get that, because they can actually follow the steps and the thinking then that with every new press release, it's like Tom Horn gets a new key to the mystery. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, and the keys to the mysteries are coming so quickly now that it's almost impossible to keep up with everything that's happening. I mean, just on the one subject alone of what's going on in Rome right now, what's going on at the Vatican. If you watch Raiders News Update, we've hardly had space on the website to include any news other than what's coming out of Rome. And by the way, that includes tomorrow morning as well. There are two of the Vatican's theologians that have come forth now. They've published two different books. One's called The Pope's War. The other is called Obedience and Freedom. They're both in Italian, but you'll see the English story about those books at Raiders News Update tomorrow. And the headline is from Vatican Insider, so it's one of the most well-respected, thoroughly researched agencies that cover news on Rome. And the name of the article is "When the Church Plots Against Itself." And there's a theologian for the church by the name of Matthew Fox. He's a former Dominican. And he says that Pope Benedict XVI is the primary author of a plot against the church to systematically destroy the freedom of the faithful and enslave them to the magisterium. What he's saying is really important, because his point is that both when he was Cardinal Ratzinger and also since he's been the Pope, in these secret, whatever they have, these rulings inside the Vatican where they rule for or against particular kinds of theological positions, he has consistently ruled against the theologians who are in support of changes to the church since the Vatican II Reformation. So again, we're not going to talk about that tonight, but that came up in the first show, that there is something very mysterious involving Vatican II that is involved in what's going on in Rome right now. And now, for the first time, we find out that, according at least to this one Dominican theologian, that Pope Benedict is right in the middle of ruling against the theologians who are for Vatican II, which means that there is a movement to try to restore some of the pre-Vatican II authoritarianism, and that is very much in line with what many of the Catholic scholars believe is implied by the name Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, that he will want to restore the original Roman authorities of the Catholic Church, which means the Catholic Church will be the universal church under the empire of Antichrist, and you're part of it or you're probably dead. So that's the implication from it. There's a second priest right now, and his is the one that's called Obedience and Freedom. Anyway, you can read all about it tomorrow. But so there's so much amazing stuff that's coming out of Rome right now, we can hardly keep up with it, and also report other things that I'm very interested in, like transhumanism, eugenics, what's happening in the genetics revolution, what's happening in prophecy in general, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with changes to the earth. It is a rapid fire. Well, when the Bible says that the time would come when the earth would literally reel to and fro, I mean, I had no idea that it would be such an explosion, such an acceleration, as Daniel said, of knowledge that people would be running to and fro. You can hardly keep up with it. Well, back to the question. That Funes said that that official disclosure of aliens was going to raise theological questions. That brings us to the next question. and that in what way will the Vatican, according to Funes and others, in what way will they suggest that our religious beliefs are going to have to be moderated, and evidently fairly soon, based on the disclosure or the revealing of alien intelligence? And there was something I did, and I invited you to be part of it a couple of years ago, Stephen. I don't remember why, but you couldn't be. But if you recall, in January of 2010, the Royal Society, the National Academy of Sciences out of the United Kingdom, they hosted representatives from NASA, the European Space Agency, the United Nations, the Office of Space Affairs from the United Nations. Anyway, it was their 350th anniversary celebration. And what they chose on their 350th anniversary to discuss was the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for science and society. And if you recall, at the time, Lord Martin Rees, who is the president of the Royal Society, but he's also the astronomer royal, he's the one that whispers all the esoteric information into the Queen's ear, he announced that aliens could be staring us in the face in a form that humans are completely unable to recognize. Now, talk about how you could write a book. What was he talking about? And what we did at the time was, we wound up with 20 hours of interviews, and we interviewed everybody from Jesse Marcel to the original investigators of the Roswell event, to theologians, to Chuck Missler, and like I said, I invited you, and I don't recall what it was, but I think you were visiting with your daughter maybe or something in California or something. But in any case, what does he mean? They're staring us in the face in a form that humans are unable to recognize. Now, I asked that question, by the way, of James Hughes, who was the World Transhumanist Association leader. He's now the leader of the IEET, which is the #1 think tank online for the transhumanist community, what he thought it meant. And, he went into all kinds of stuff about, there could be microbial intelligence that we think is dirt, and it's monitoring us. So he went into stuff like that. But what came back to my mind is, what if they're already here? They're already walking among us, and the reason we wouldn't recognize them is because they look exactly like us. Now, that's very strange. Some people would reject that entirely, but I wondered if that wasn't the astronomer royal's way of saying what he, in fact, believed. In any case, out of that whole 350th anniversary, and there was Nick Pope, we interviewed him, but he was also there during the hearings there at the Academy of Science in the UK. They use language like, we have overwhelming evidence. We have unprecedented proof. I mean, all kinds of loaded language like that to suggest how close they believed we were to making disclosure of intelligent alien life. Well, that was only in 2010. It was only 1 year after the Vatican invited all of those scientists, 30 scientists from different countries, to come to the Vatican to explain to their bishops what would be the impact on society, including the religious ideas. You had Simon Conway Morris, who's a professor of evolutionary paleobiology at Cambridge University. He was at the National Academy of Science, and he was the most worried guy there, talking about the unknown unknowns and how it might not be a good thing, and basically repeating something I heard Steve Quayle one time say, that these things might come here and think we look like a pretty good lunch. Stephen Hawking. So anyway, everybody was there, but it also included spokespeople for the Vatican, and once again, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, and he gives this long interview with the Osservatore Romano newspaper, where he's weighing in on the question, are we alone in the universe? And he stated at the time that we are at a time now where there is a certain possibility, in fact, the chances are more likely than not, of intelligent life in the cosmos, and that nation, you remember when he said that notion would not contradict our faith.
Yes.
Again, what does he mean by that? Because definitely there are some people on the earth that the notion of intelligent life that is morally closer to God, morally superior to us, in the sense that they're not fallen and we are, that would definitely tinker with somebody's faith. There's a lot of people on the earth that are Christians, and it absolutely would contradict their faith. So what's he talking about? There is a kind of new faith that is coming, and it responds to the question of whether extraterrestrials would need to be redeemed or whether we would need to be evangelized by them. And that is becoming the common thread amidst much of the new theological discourse that is coming out of the highest levels of the authorities there in Rome that do work at the observatories and speak to the issue of astrobiology. Funes himself said, his explanation was, God was made man in Jesus to save us, but other intelligent beings may exist, and it's never been said that they would need redemption. In fact, they're in full friendship with their Creator, and by full friendship, he was again repeating how in the Vatican, the theologians now are accepting the possibility that an extraterrestrial species, I want to say exists, they put the word may exist on it, but that it is morally superior to man, closer to God than we are, and that as a consequence, they're coming. And when they come, they're going to evangelize us. In other words, they're going to better instruct us in our faith, and that's the reason why, going back over all these years, you keep hearing that redundant statement from guys like Funes and others from the Vatican who are saying, when disclosure is made, theology is going to have to be reconsidered. I don't know if I ever sent it to you, but 3 or 4, maybe it's been longer than that. I guess it's been maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Time is getting past me now in my old age. But Guy Consolmagno, he wrote his Brother Astronomer, Adventures of a Vatican Scientist, and I think I sent it to you.
Yeah, and we've talked about that over the years. You know, we really addressed that because Cosmologno basically told everybody what was going on, in my opinion.
Well, and then on the last show, and this was what we got so much email on, is the paper that was written this last year by the Interdisciplinary what was published actually in the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science, but it was written by Father Giuseppe Tanzella-Nitti, and he's a member of the Pontifical University in Rome, so he's a member of the Vatican's deepest theological discoursers. And he explains in that article how mankind is going to be evangelized during contact with spiritual aliens, and every believer in God needs to prepare for it, he argues, because we are going to greet extraterrestrial civilization evidently pretty soon. We're going to admit they're extraordinarily advanced beyond us, more intelligent, more moral, whatever. And according to him, contact with these non-extraterrestrial intelligences are going to change our understanding between the relationship that we have with God and the whole idea of the gospel and Christianity and creation, and that when they arrive, it is not going to immediately oblige Christians to have to renounce their faith in God, but that very soon the renunciation will come because they're going to present religious content. Now, what does that mean again? You said a moment ago they've got their own Dropa stone. They've got what? Some kind of high-tech type video that depicts Christ. And what's Jesus going to tell us? I'm an alien. These are my brothers. They're here. Who knows what any of that could possibly mean? But what Tanzella-Nitti says is that once the trustworthiness of the information is verified, what does that mean? How could we verify the trustworthiness of information that is brought to us from an extraterrestrial intelligence? Why in the world is a guy who is part of the Pontifical University in Rome talking about this, and why is it being published in the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science? We're talking here, folks, about peer-reviewed information, as it were. So these are not Johnny-come-latelys. What in the world is it that they're trying to say? What is it that they're trying to prepare mankind for? In what way could you verify that extraterrestrial information is true or not true? But in any case, he says once it has been verified, then Christians are going to have to reconduct a rereading of the gospel inclusive of the new data, and it's going to change our beliefs about God. So that was, I think I said more about that in the last show than I'm saying right now, because I don't want to just repeat a bunch of information, but that was the point on which we got the most email, and Donna had to send that link to a gazillion people out there that could hardly believe that that's the position of the Vatican, but it is. And so how is this more complete ET gospel going to de-emphasize or significantly modify our understanding of salvation through Jesus Christ? I don't know, but he's just one of the spokesmen. There's a former Vatican Observatory Vice Director, Christopher Corbali, and he wrote an article following up on this one called "What If There Were Other Inhabited Worlds?" and he concludes that Jesus simply will not remain the only word of salvation. That's his words. He says that we're going to try. We'll explore the alien. We'll let it be whatever it is without rushing into classification categories. We're not going to be mean to it. So this would very much fall into, I guess, Obama strategy. But then he drops a bombshell, which I printed and put on my board in front of me. And here's what it says. While Christ is the first and the last word, the Alpha and Omega spoken to humanity, he's not necessarily the only word spoke to the universe. For the word spoken to us does not seem to exclude an equivalent word spoken to aliens. They too could have had their Logos event, whatever that event might have been. It does not have to be a repeat death and resurrection. If we allow God more imagination than some religious thinkers seem to have had, he must be talking about Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. For God, as omnipotent, is not restricted to one form of language, the human, end quote. So the language couldn't be more explosive, and it couldn't be more conspiratorial in the purest sense of the word.
I think that people had better realize, too, something. The idea that God created mankind in his image and likeness, the Bible declares that Jesus didn't die for the angels. In the book of Enoch and some of the extra-biblical texts, we see the pleading of the fallen angels, especially those in Tartarus, whether they're the Grigori, G-R-E-G-O-R-I, or the Chalkidri. The thing is, that's fascinating because, again, I tell people this, the idea of mankind was something so astonishingly marvelous that even a third of the angels that rebelled with Lucifer were jealous. In other words, what is man that thou art mindful of him, the psalmist asks. So what I would say, and I would love to get, and I really mean this, get into it with those type of statements is this, truly God is infinite. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent. All the attributes that God is, he is. But he, in his self-revealing mode, has said, this is who my son, and if you read the entire Gospels, you know this, we all know this as Christians, that through him, by him, and in him, Colossians 1:16 and 17, does everything exist or consist that is in existence. So, in other words, the worlds were spoken into existence, but mankind was something so unique that all the angels were commanded not to worship man, but to worship the handiwork of a living God. And about a third of them said, not on your life. And so when you and I, Tom Horn, talk about transhumanism, and it's interesting. In other words, the very argument of transhumanism underscores our response to that, quote, guy that's taking pot shots at us. And the point is to say, look, you can't use circular logic claiming God's omnipotent, all-powerful, and certainly not limited, but if the Lord himself limits his dealings with this specific group of humanity, why are these fallen angels, which are obviously more powerful, all this stuff, why are they so interested in tampering with us sexually? And that's what gets into the fall of the angels, the daughters of men, the whole Genesis 6 thing. And then, as you have stated so many times, Tom, and this is all involved in this, that people have got to understand that deception is going to be so great, the arguments are going to be so compelling, the evidence is going to be so demonstrated, and then the power, Jesus himself said, that the evil one will be able to call fire down from heaven. No offense, he just did it in Texas, and nobody, very few people realize that the entire Texas tornado thing, 12, total weather warfare. And again, what's so interesting to me, Tom, is notice this. Notice when you and I first started talking on the radio, a decade or so ago, and what was, they used to boo-hoo us or poo-poo us, I guess more poo-poo, whatever they used to do with it. They used to complain a lot. The idea is now is so much of what we brought out, and we were called crazy, all these different, well, crazy was the nicest stuff. But now people have to deal with the complete, quote, singularity. And I believe the singularity is nothing more than the alien influence. Look, I really do believe that it's not the World Weekly News, but I believe that we already have cohesion and groups working with aliens that look like us, shape-shifting, okay? Even in the Lost Books of Eden, I'll throw something out here that most people don't understand. The Lost Books of Eden and the writings attributed to Adam, look, I think some people think that Adam was just some illiterate hick that didn't know how to read or write. If the guy could name every single thing just by nature, Adam was tuned into the mind of God. So instantly, if you would, he shared in the marvelous omnipotence of God as God allowed him to. I mean, if somebody's being created in the image of God, God's not going to say, listen, I limit your IQ to 150 and because I don't want to feel threatened. Saying that is that we've got this marvelous picture of initial creation, the tampering with creation, the redemption, and the soon coming of the Lord to resurrect us. Now, Jesus did say something pretty important. He said, if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. And I can tell you this, the average, and I'm saying this, the average smug Christian cannot even defend his belief in any attack by, quote, the intellectuals. Now, Stephen Hawking, okay, bright guy. I would like to see literally him get saved and come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. I'm serious about that. But, now they're just talking about they want to, you put it on your website, they want to basically download Hawking's brain to see what made him tick. And the elements that we're dealing with now, we're talking about, if you will, a data dump on the entire population of the world. We're seeing visual imagery and massive UFO sightings. The coming of Planet X, Nibiru, the 10th planet, Gabriel's 5th. We're seeing the upheavals and everything. And I can just tell you this, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that in the geologic realm, the geologic equivalent of Hegel, the dialectic would be you generate earthquakes, you generate volcanoes, and all of a sudden you just flip your fingers, snap your fingers, and then obviously somebody's turning off what's causing that stuff to happen, and you just wowed most of the planet. So the technology, the singularity, all these things we're talking about, Tom, ultimately, and this is what David Flynn did, and maybe in the next hour, we're just about at the top of this hour, we can talk about some of the amazing realities. I talked to Mark, David's twin brother, and I said, Mark, I prayed about the situation. It broke my heart. I'm saddened. It's just the great loss, and I mean a great loss, of one of the most beautiful men that I've ever met in my life, and also, in my opinion, and I know you share this, a man whose mind was really beyond most of our ability. It was his graciousness that brought us into his realm. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I fear God too much to flatter any man, but as Tom will tell you, and I will tell you, there was something so heavenly gifted to that man, and I've heard so many criticisms, and these are my words, and I'm serious, of how should I say this, mentally challenged individuals who could not come up with a basic formula for baby soup or whatever, baby formula, ingredients for baby formula, taking this guy on. And Tom, you brought up a wonderful statement to me on the phone and through emails that he's probably the most ripped off guy that's ever written anything, and people have built entire books never giving him attribution. And it's not that he would have wanted or even cared so much, but it's that they're deriving the wrong, they're using his data and coming up with some new age or bizarre thing that he never met. And David stayed true to the Scripture. He stayed true to his God. He absolutely loved Jesus. And ladies and gentlemen, I would sit with him for hours, and he would blow my mind, but he was in another dimension. I believe that the Lord took him home, because at that point, I believe God said, David, your work on earth is done. Come up yonder, or come up hither. And I'm not saying that to rationalize, what is the hard thing about losing a loved one. I'm just telling you, ladies and gentlemen, he was a gift to the church. Newton was considered the father of modern science. There has been nobody like him yet. And yet God in his majesty chose to give David Flynn the understanding of the code that had escaped Newton. Newton was there. He postulated about it. It really bothered him, but it was sealed up, Tom. And now I think the things that you're talking about and you're writing about and we're talking about are those things that Daniel probably saw in Technicolor, but they were sealed up until the time of their introduction. And I think that's why we're on, whatever is the date today, the 4th of April, and we're telling people, because I've noticed this, that when God puts us on, it's usually to have pre-countered some really disturbing information that's going to come out there. And, we'll get our flack that we're just, I love it, barbaric, locked in a barbarous religious time. Well, I don't think there's so much about barbarous, but I can tell you this, the future that they're promising, it may be sugar-coated, but it's like swallowing a milkshake with razor blades, that each razor blade then turns on some nanomotor and just devours you from the inside. So saying all that to say is that David talked about what you are talking about now. Obviously, he knew what was coming. And, you want to just address that? We've got about 5 minutes, because or we can go into the next hour without even stopping. But I think that people don't understand. You published Temple at the Center of Time. You published some of the most concise and insightful essays, which, by the way, are going to be in his anthology. Just absolutely, as his publisher, as his friend, and as someone who is equally amazed at his God-given genius, you've got to sometimes shake your head when you see everybody and their dog. And I'm telling you, some of these people that have ripped him up, they should have flea collars and they should repent. But the point is, those are my statements. Don't get mad at Tom for those. The point is that and forgive me, that and I know that we were graced with an extraordinary individual given supernatural revelation from the throne. And it's almost like where David left this earth at that point, it was not yet time to go the next step. I'm convinced he knew some stuff, and he was waiting for the right time, and God said, David, it's not time. Come home, That's the only thing I know in my spirit.
Well, you've raised actually several things I'd like to respond to, but let's go to the break, and after the break, if I can have permission to do so, I'd like to respond to a couple of things. David Flynn, but also some of the stuff that you were talking about, some of these mental midgets that are operating at full steam right now, that are highly critical of people like you, me, David Flynn, Chuck Missler, any of the rest of us that are out there trying to open the world's eyes.
Gentlemen, before we take this break, folks, if you're just tuning in, this is episode 622. We've got Steve Quayle and Tom Horn tonight as our special guest. And, gentlemen, I'd like you to give out your contact information and tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is just a Raiders News Update at gmail.com. The website, of course, is raidersnewsupdate.com.
And, Tom, the new book, Petrus Romanus?
Yeah, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. It's, of course, you can get it anywhere, but I want people to know, maybe we'll have a chance to say something about this. On the 24th, or is it the 23rd? Yeah, I think maybe the 23rd of April, we're going to give away a huge library on DVD. And this is everything from ebooks to audio files to movies to huge libraries, actually, of books. But we made a deal between us and Survivor Mall where we're going to be giving that away free if people buy that book from Survivor Mall. But they can get it anywhere. It'll be in bookstores. It'll be at Amazon. The name's Petrus Romanus. The Final Pope is Here. But know that if you see all that big advertising, and actually there's an ad on the front of Steve Quayle's website right now, too, that's advertising, you click on it, you go to that website. Just know that when you see all of that free material, you're not going to receive that if you buy the book at Amazon. Now, as a publisher, I don't care where you buy it because it's from my distributor anyway. But that one option for the free libraries, that's from Survivor Mall only. That's their deal.
All right, and Steve?
Well, I think, first of all, everyone should take advantage of this because when you buy from Survival Mall, I don't think that you could go out, the average person cannot go out and do what Tom has done or even I've done in the time we've been at it. Look, Tom's been at this a long time. I've been at it. But when you go and order Petrus Romanus from Survivor Mall, you're going to get the audio, video files, and dozens of PDF books. And the point is, I'm telling you, this is a work. How do I say this? It's precept upon precept. We're trying to provide everyone a foundation to understand the eternal ramifications of even seemingly harmless news articles or something says, that's just all that crazy stuff about the Vatican, or all that's crazy Tom Horn and Steve Quayle about giants. The bottom line is we're sharing with you the fruit of our labor and investigations, because most of you simply cannot do it. So I would encourage everyone to take advantage to that, the giveaway that Tom has offered. I mean, Tom, when you put out just your researcher's library and sent me a copy, by the way, thank you very much, that was something I want to do. Well, I got to tell you something. My drawer of good ideas gets higher and higher. I just don't have the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share something. What Tom has done is given you so much foundation that then the scriptures, as you read them and as God puts his time keys into everything, it's like a combination to a safe. You got to go a little left, a little right, a little left, and finally turn to the right and flip the lever to open it. Most of the safes. The idea is that you have to understand to apply yourself, because and here's the thing: if everyone listening to this show would become more studious and student-like, instead of sitting in, and I know, Bruce, you have a chat room, and I'm not a fan of those, but you got them, and that's okay. But the point is, asking A, and I say this to those asking A who has no clue, no understanding, no depth, no history, and no walk or any type of reference point to even discuss this, what he thinks, and somebody says, I think Horn is crazy and Quayle's crazier, well, thank you very much, but that's about as dumb a ad hominem attack as you can get. What we're trying to say is this: apathy, indifference, and just a general I don't care attitude, those are going to kill you. But if you'll just make the effort, and I think that this is such an amazing book, amazing offer. Look, it's critical, it's pertinent, it's time. It doesn't get any plainer than that. Now, saying that, I want everyone to understand something, that Angel Wars plays into this, because the book Angel Wars that I think is just the best presentation of all of the spiritual deception out there. The first part of it, the first half of it is basically antiquity, myth, legends. The second half is transhumanism, singularity. The whole idea, the simple idea is this: is Satan is promising humanity a judgment-free future, eternal life, eternal pleasure. When your body gets old, you just basically download your subconscious, and then even be going on that, you can share someone else's wonderful sexual experiences for a price. Tom, I remember talking about sex bots over 15 years ago on talk radio. People thought I was crazy. You just posted on Raiders the other day that now they've got artificial skin that can bleed and heal itself. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're in the termination, and where the Terminator wasn't just a movie, and you and I both, Tom, have said over and over and over that the movies are preconditioning you for acceptance, or they initially try and say, oh, that's just that crazy science fiction stuff. Well, when you find out that the Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek fame was an active CIA agent, you find out how many scripts don't come out of the writer's mind before they come through Langley. And then I just quoted to you Ben Rich's statement. Anything you can imagine they've already done. The idea is this, is that you, in their minds, the elite minds, is you're too dumb to live. And that's the alien idea, too. The egalitarian elitism of an intergalactic, I guess you'd say, predatory pervert that has to come to Earth and seduce Earth women to get their ovum, or to, basically rape men to get their sperm. I think the bottom line is this is not something that's just new to the science fiction genre. This is something that's been around for literally thousands and thousands of years, and then we can't talk about it tonight, but we're dealing with things that the Vatican Library and the secrets of the Vatican, trust me, if you see a National Geographic Secrets of the Vatican, you're not seeing the secrets. It's just like the Smithsonian trying to pass off every giant bone that's ever been found of a giant fallen angel human hybrid as being some dinosaur bone, or when they can't pull that one off, they have to come up with Gigantopithecus, the great ape, but then they can't explain, the little people they're just finding in Indonesia and other parts of the world. Well, the idea of this is this. You are being fed selective garbage, I'll use a nice term. You're given regurgitated vomit. You have the choice of hot, medium, and cold vomit, but nevertheless it's vomit in the mainstream. And what we're trying to do tonight is give you the meat. So the book Angel Wars is available only from my site, stevequayle.com, and you can go online and order it. And Weather Wars, which I wrote, Tom, I think I wrote that close to 10 years ago. Most didn't even believe in Weather Wars, and yet we see it. Dutch Sense and others are talking about this. So what we're doing tonight is we're giving the people a cornucopia of truth and tying it back into Petrus Romanus. The final pope is here. Now, let me make it easy for everybody. If the final pope is here, that means we are in the final countdown, not the end of the world, but the end of the age, which Jesus warned us about. And I find it interesting that the aliens will have to attack the person and the claims of Jesus Christ, and if they can't attack him, then they're going to have to claim they created him.
Gentlemen, with that, let's take about a 7-minute break, and then we're going to come back with part 2 tonight with Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. We'll be back after these messages.
Hey, well, Tom, I think that if we could just take a few minutes and let's talk about our David Flynn anthology and just some of the stuff that you've watched, because, again, as his publisher, I don't think a more timely and important book was ever written than Temple at the Center of Time. And the thing is that you, of all people, have seen more stuff of David's probably ripped off than anybody else. And, I don't have a problem with, I put 900 footnotes or so in my book Angel Wars because I don't have the wherewithal to claim originality, all this stuff. But it's really a travesty and a tragedy that this kind of stuff happens. So just take it for a few minutes. First of all, let's go ahead and tell the people how close we are to having his anthology ready, for people to read, and also just kind of your thoughts on it as you have been acting kind of as editor-in-chief.
Steve, if I can, let me preface that first by saying something else, because when I start talking about David, we can take that and lead back into this whole conversation about the UFO and alien agenda, the Vatican agenda. But before we went to the break, you mentioned a couple of extra-biblical books, including the Book of Enoch, and scholarly research related to it. And I want to say something that's it's actually been in my craw for a few days. Is this okay?
Absolutely.
It's my position, it's your position, and this is the final time I'm ever going to say this, that the Bible, as we hold it today, and by the way, I still preach from an old King James version of the Bible, is the inerrant word of God, and there is no other. That's an evangelical position that affirms that God in his wisdom preserves sacred scripture, unlike all of the books or collections of works in the world, and that it is free of doctrinal error, due to having been given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works, says 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. It's also common evangelical scholarship that while no other text can claim that same unique authority, apocryphal and pseudepigraphical literature, such as I included in the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts, such as you were referring to before we went to the break, the books of Enoch, Jasher, Jubilees, and so on, that these provide literature that often precedes or follows the chronology of biblical texts, and which are routinely used by biblical scholars as supplemental works within academic settings to help students of the Bible and history better understand cultural and historical context within the Word of God. In fact, I'll bet you that most pastors and Bible teachers that are listening to this radio show tonight have copies of the works of Josephus, for instance, to better understand the history and the wars of the Jews, because those types of ancient texts provide commentators valuable insight into what many ancient Jews and early Christians believed when God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, according to Hebrews 1:1. So in the same way that American history texts are not considered inspired scripture, but they help students in junior and high school understand our national history and our founding beliefs, these ancient extra-biblical books, often called apocrypha or pseudepigrapha, are valuable supplemental resources for assisting serious researchers and students in the study of the Bible and Bible times. For instance, the Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish religious work. It is traditionally ascribed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. It's referred to, in fact, quoted in the New Testament in Jude 14:15. It's referred to in 1 Peter 3:19. In addition to that, the Book of Enoch was considered scripture in other ancient works, such as the Epistle of Barnabas. It was considered scripture by many of the early church fathers. We know that to be true with Athenagoras. We know it to be true with Clement of Alexandria, who was a close personal friend of the Apostle Paul. We know that to be true with Irenaeus. We know that to be true with Tertullian. Tertullian actually even wrote in the year 200 that the only reason that the Book of Enoch was rejected from the canon was because the Jews were offended by the fact that it specifically prophesied the coming of Jesus Christ. Furthermore, fragments of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was one of the things that helped scholars verify its historicity. And the bottom line is, for 700 years following the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the Book of Enoch and other books like it were highly respected. They were kept in churches, they were read in churches, and in many cases they were part of the canon. But in any case, no matter how many times we clarify that point, there is this narrow segment of churchianity today, and I'm not saying this for their benefit. I'm saying it for the benefit of those people out there who haven't made up their mind yet, and they're confused by these people. These people insist that believers stay stupid or face their wrath, such as that email that you shared with me last week while I was speaking at the Lakeland, Florida conference, and you sent me that email of a believer and his wife who were excommunicated by a megalomaniacal pastor and his zombie church followers for daring to listen to Steve Quayle and Tom Horn. Well, Steve, I think these people are described by Jude as actually connected to the prophecies from the Book of Enoch as end times tares, false Christians. Jude portrays them this way. He calls them clouds without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots, grumblers, malcontents, following their own sinful desires, who boast about themselves and flatter others to try to raise their own profile because they don't have the Spirit of Christ within them, so they latch on to Steve Quayle's audience or Tom Horton's audience, or they try to get us to get engaged in some kind of a debate so that they can raise their own profile. Well, I tell you what, Steve, you can tell this is irritating to me, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but I needed somewhere to vent this. I've never seen a time when the tares among the wheat are so agitated by the demons that are in control of their minds and spirits that they can't seem to fathom how they are actually the fulfillment of end times prophecy, and that just like Judas Iscariot, they have a role to play. They do. And they have a destiny to play out, and they are going to go to their own place in eternity, just as Acts 1:25 says Judas did. But what mostly seems to be enraging these poor simpletons is how they, like the Pharisees did with Jesus, can't control free, evangelical, anointed spokespersons like yourself, Gary Stearman, Chuck Missler, and others who are warning of the wrath that is to come, and they're telling people to prepare now, or at least to open their eyes to the conditions of the world. And I'll say one final thing, and then I'll get off this, because you can tell it's going to irritate me. Satan was once described as the Lord of the Flies. And just like flies, this waterless cloud society is out there buzzing louder than ever now, hoping that we'll become so preoccupied by swatting at them while they fly around our heads on the internet that we'll be unable to concentrate on the bigger, more serious issues facing mankind and the church today. But I, for one, have instructed my staff to blacklist every person that contacts us that way. Every person that emails us that way now goes into a spam filter, and they could send us 1,000 emails and we'll never even know they tried to contact us, because I refuse for myself or Raiders News Update to give another second of any of our time to those kind of people. And, by the way, that's going to do nothing but infuriate them, and the flies are going to buzz even louder. And they are going to keep attacking us, by the way, for opening the church's eyes to what's happening now and what lies ahead, because this is our course in life, Steve. It's our calling until the Lord come, and just like Jesus said of such people, which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted and slain? If they could, they would us too, but they're not going to until God's done with us, and once he's done with us, we're going to go sit up there with David Flynn and talk about how this is all unfolding on the earth, right?
Amen. And, I was thinking about David and that, and I actually wrote that in my preface to Sidonia. Tom wrote a preface to Temple at the Center of Time. Just tell what's in the anthology, because Mark, David's twin brother, and ladies and gentlemen, I know him. I've spent time with him. Mark is an equally gifted man and equally humble, but let me just tell you something. These guys were absolutely two peas out of a genius pod. Now, I'm not flattering Mark either, but I can tell you this, that I'm personally tired of, and these are my words, okay, but Gene Scott said it well, okay? He said he is amazed. You remember when Gene Scott used to talk about pissants, okay? Now, pissant is an actual thing, okay? And he used to have a theme song. I've almost, a couple of times wanted to play his, but there you had another man who was ahead of his time. But let me just share this. I'm going to ditto and echo what Tom has just stated. The fact that these absolute, and now I'm going to just vent for about a minute. These people who have done nothing, they do nothing, they're anonymous, they don't even have the testicles or the cojones to come and use their real name, yet they go on all these boards. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're on the boards listening to this instead of studying to show yourselves approved unto God, shame on you. If you're too lazy to open your Bible, Tom wasn't, I wasn't. We are bringing to you life and death. And Tom, I got to tell you something. Never have I seen a group of people so bent on self-destruction. Never, ever. And I got to tell you something. I agree with my adversary when, and I've been personally mocked by some of those who've tried to bribe me and said, Steve, you're getting flack from the people you're trying to help. When you going to figure out they're not worth it? Now, how would you like to hear that from someone that 1 minute is trying to kill you, but the next minute they're offering you the olive leaf and a whole lot of millions of dollars just to shut up and go away? Well, my answer to that is this. I answer to Jesus. I answer to the brethren. I have men that I submit myself to. And, Tom, you and I have been at this a long time. And the spam filter, I have unfortunately answered, and I'm done doing that, okay? Somebody said you can hit the delete button. Well, sometimes when it comes in and it's got FU on it, it's too hard to delete, and I just want to see what the basis of this one is. But here it is. It's an orchestrated attack by the powers of hell to keep you from knowing the truth, because Jesus said, if you abide in him and his word abides in you, then ye shall know the truth shall set you free. The world uses ye shall know the truth shall set you free, and my immediate response when I hear someone who doesn't know Jesus say that is, liar, you're in bondage. You can't even know the truth, because without Jesus there is no truth. Quote the scripture, the whole world lieth in the evil one. So when I post the Book of Giants, which is also Dead Sea Scroll fragments, and I post it in all that its entirety, it's kind of like tiptoeing through the tulips with Twinkies. And when I say my definition of Twinkie isn't a little, one of those things like a chocolate pie or a little thing that Hostess used to make. I'm talking about Twinkies and spiritual dilettantes that have nothing better to do than basically they won't even challenge us on the scripture. They just basically, one group, I think one of the emails I sent you, the guy, I finally wrote him back and said, I want to know these guys' name. He wouldn't tell me so I could, go Matthew 18 with them. But, the point is that the nameless and the shameless. And Jesus said, and I'm going to share this, never in my life have I said anything to anybody to say, trust me. I've said, take it to the Lord in prayer. Tom and I spent a lot of money, put up with a lot of stuff, and especially like his house burning down and all of the threats he lives under, all the threats I live under. And, the point is that some of you who are adult Christian males, and God knows, Tom, the bravest men I know, and I mean this generally, with a few exceptions, the bravest men I know, or the defenders of the faith, are women of faith. I'm not talking busybodies. I'm not talking Jezebels. I'm talking about praying, interceding women of God who stand their ground. And, the thing that I'm trying to get across tonight, and then we'll go into the David Flynn thing, is, ladies and gentlemen, God does, for his reasons, and it's God and he can do it, put his treasure in earthen vessels. And shame on you if you smash the vessel and prevent that treasure from being placed in someone's heart and absolutely being fruitful and multiplying. And, Tom, I believe that some of these critics better take the words of Jesus to heart. It would be better for them to have never been born to cause these little ones to stumble. Because when people bear false witness, and then, the Bible specifically says an abomination. We're talking about the abomination that will make desolate tonight. But an abomination are those who sow discord amongst the brethren. And I've never seen a more discordant, pissant-like attitude than I'm seeing now. And I'm telling my listeners, Tom, whenever I go on talk radio, grow up, shut up, get on your knees and pray, and start to seek the Lord as if your life depends on it, because it truly does. Now let's talk about David and how he saw everything tying in. You vented, I vented, now it's vented. I'm not going to defend any more to anyone. No offense, but with 100 guys assigned to me, with 10 individual false identities on the internet, I got 1,000 voices of damnation out there. And, I don't need another 5 to that. So let's talk about David and just get into that.
Yeah, and this is such a cool opportunity to do what a lot of others haven't done, and that's to give credit where credit is due, and to tie some of the research from by David Flynn into our discussion here about Petrus Romanus, the Vatican, and ET. But let's start by first giving an update to people on the Flynn book, because we have had a lot of email wanting to know when is the David Flynn collection, when is that going to be available. And here's what I can let people know. A lot of progress has been made. Steve, I got all the files you sent me. I got the file yesterday that's got the version of Cydonia that had the images in it that we needed. So both of the feature books, Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars, as well as the book that I published, Temple at the Center of Time by David Flynn, these have been set up now for the typesetter. We also received the new introduction from David's twin brother Mark for the front of the book. It's been edited, and it's also set up for the typesetter. David's family, via Mark, were very gracious to supply us with pictures of David all the way from the time that he was a young boy up through adulthood, and those are going to be included as a memorial in the middle of the book. Of course, this book will also include some of David's most famous articles that Steve mentioned a moment ago, discoveries at the back of the book, so that people will see the original research that has been so often plagiarized from David and used in other people's works, sometimes verbatim, but David's going to get credit for his original breakthrough materials like he should. For those that have been emailing and asking when they'll be able to get this collection, we're currently right now really only waiting on a cover draft. As soon as we get that, I'll send it to you, Steve, and between the two of us, we'll figure out what we want the cover to be exactly. And then I got those images from you yesterday. That was another big question. So the David Flynn collection really is very close now to going to the typesetter, and once that happens, we're really only probably around 6 weeks from having books in print. So that could mean that we'll have this large volume. It's going to be a big book. If you've seen Stephen Quayle's books, like the Giants book, it's going to be a big book like that because it's 2 complete volumes, his 2 most well-known and published books, and then also articles and pictures. But we're thinking now, probably around as early as June or thereabout, this book will be in print. So now, secondly, if you haven't read David's books, there is a reason used ones are considered a bargain at $75 a piece on Cydonia. In fact, Nita or somebody was telling me the other day they saw one for something like $500 or $600 was on eBay. But there's a reason, because David was, as Steve so eloquently said earlier, he was one of a kind. He was an original. And I don't know his brother Mark in the same way, but from what I understand from you, Steve, he's very much in that same vein. He's a genius. And the deal is true. I often said of David Flynn, he almost reminded me of a savant in the sense that he saw the world in a way that nobody else does. And he never ceased to amaze me with how he would see the world, and he would see measurements and distance and things like that, poor old spud picker like me, I couldn't see it at all. But I am a publisher, and I can speak directly to his book, Temple at the Center of Time. I should, of course, qualify that I could never fill David Flynn's shoes in describing it. Those of us like me, I think Dr. Heiser said this once before, certainly Steve has said it many times, others have recognized for some time that David was a man unlike any other, and that's the truth. So none of us are going to try to fill his shoes, but having said that, it was about 4 years ago when David contacted me, and he said, "Hey, Tom, I think I may have found something unusual." And what had happened was, by accident, David, well, first of all, he made one discovery, followed by more, and then more. And what he was doing is he was using satellites to make measurements on the Earth that seemed to indicate that the location of the original Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem was related in time-distance anomalies to important dates in history, especially those that were related to nations that had either ruled or had shown interest in the cradle of civilization, and specifically this area where the temple was built. And the temple mount is considered sacred geography. It's the most holy site by many of the world's oldest religions, including the Jews, Muslims, and others. And there's good reasons around that. But until David wrote this book, what most of the world don't know is how important dates in history were directly connected to this site. For instance, this was the first thing he emailed me. What he found was that it is 539 statute miles from the point of the temple of Jerusalem's foundation stone to the palace of Belshazzar. This was the political center of Babylon, right? And more importantly, it was the exact location where the writing on the wall, the famous writing on the wall, occurred in 539 BC, and the kingdom of Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians the same night. So the anomaly here is that David discovered you have a distance in miles of 539, echoed exactly by the same number or date of 539 years BC, when Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin was written on the wall in the king's palace by a ghostly hand. This was a spooky occurrence that carried with it the meaning that Belshazzar's kingdom had been measured and that it had come to an end. Well, this was just astonishing. So what happened was, Flynn made that finding. He emailed me, but what he wondered was that just one astonishing coincidence, or would he find other specific locations specifically related to other kingdoms or governments that had ruled over or had affected the location of the Temple Mount, and whether the dates upon which their rule had existed would also correspond in mile relationships with the Temple Mount. And what he discovered was that they did, and it's astonishing. And that's what the book Temple at the Center of Time is about. Another case point, by the way, the relationship between Napoleon Bonaparte and his proclamation for a Jewish state of Palestine in 1799. That was the proclamation that increased a drive for Jews worldwide to pursue a sovereign state in Israel. But what's interesting is when you extend the measuring line from the historical center of Bonaparte's Paris to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, it shows the distance in nautical miles of 1799, exactly the same year that he called for a Jewish state of Palestine. So the intriguing connection to Flynn's research was clear. Napoleon made a proclamation of historical importance to the Jewish nation in the year 1799, and not coincidentally, evidently, the distance from Paris to the Temple Mount in nautical miles corresponded perfectly at 1799. And let me just give you one more, and then if people want to know more, they can get the book from us later. The most extraordinary part, I felt, of Flynn's research was when he learned how the year 1948 is marked by time-distance relations to the temple. David describes in his book how Britain was the nation that was friendly to the Jews. The British defeated the Ottoman Turks. They became the administrators of the land of ancient Israel in 1917. But from then, through World War I and World War II, until 1948, London was the heart of the governing intellect over that region. Well, then Israel became a nation again, May 14th, 1948, and if you extend the measuring line from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to the exact center of ancient London, to the exact London stone underneath Cannon Street that marks its origin, a measuring line from the temple to the center of London produces 1948.40 nautical miles. So, over and over again in this book, time-distance anomalies, they go on in the temple at the center of time, including measurements from the Jerusalem temple site to the Great Pyramid in Giza, to the United States, to Russia, to Rome, to the Vatican City, other countries, and some of these include very intriguing mystical numbers like the number 33, the number 666, the number 2012. And after reading that book in its manuscript form, I was convinced that whatever these findings mean, and they are certain to be interpreted by different people in different ways, but whatever they mean, it appears at least to be mathematically improbable that all of that was just by chance. There's another part of that book, by the way, that's over my head and I can't even explain it, but it has to do with David using satellite mapping and history to diagram a pinpoint exactly where he believes that the lost Ark of the Covenant is located and where it will eventually be found or where it's being kept. And if you draw across lines on his measurements and you look at it from a satellite, there's a cave sitting out there in the middle of nowhere with an open mouth. So anyway, this was David, right? I mean, he saw things that nobody else had ever seen. He solved puzzles that nobody else had ever solved. And much of his research in Sidonia and much of his research in Temple at the Center of Time exists in other people's books with no attribution to him. But Steve Quayle and I have decided we're going to put his books in print in this collectible book, and then we're going to tell people, Steve, what we're going to do as far as making donations to his children and things like that.
Well, we basically, and with the help of David's wife, Brenda, and obviously Mark and the kids, and we're going to have a fund set up for the kids because it's only fitting that David had two children, David and Brenda have two children, and it's about time that with everyone ripping off his stuff, we just felt like it was the right thing to do in the Lord. So we're going to have this really cool thing, and it's going to be, I think, we haven't named the foundation yet, but we'll, listen, neither Tom or I will have any control of the money. It will be distributed to the kids in real time. In other words, every quarter and stuff. But what we're trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, is present not only the man, not only the genius, but let you see this unique life. What I don't think, Tom, one of the tragedies with all the critics out there, I don't think they ever understand what people go through, especially David, the last months of his life. By the way, he never lost his faith. He got down at times, and I remember the last time I was with him in his apartment, I spent all day with him, and he was showing me all the rocks and all of the artifacts that search through the mountains of Montana, and all of the things. All I can say is this: is that imagine a child with a genius-level IQ and a way of seeing the world, almost in if you will, in the most celestial, mathematical complexities. Yet it was so simple, and it was his childlike faith. And I wrote in my introduction, and since I did know him, spent time with him, shared, we would never talk for hours and hours without sharing the excitement of what Jesus was doing, what Jesus was showing us. And, you know, it was like low. Every time we, and I'm using the biblical word low, it was like we were coming, the volume of the book that was written to talk about the Lord, to lift up the Lord. And I don't think people understand that the motivation for his genius was his love for Jesus. I mean, I talked to Mark on the phone, and Mark said, you know, even from the time he was a little kid, he was raised a Catholic, but he knew that there were issues there, and then he just went out to find the real Jesus, and praise God, the real Jesus found him. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a man, in essence, I believe, inserted into the space-time continuum. Because the last talk I had with him, Tom, I said, hey, David, let's take the distance. And I asked him if he could do this, and you could see the wheels spinning. I said, now, when I say we, David, that means you, because you're way over my head in mathematics. I said, but take the distance to the different planets and the known distance to the stars, and let's take the square roots of them. And we started throwing out some stuff. I said, let's four-dimensionally model this thing and see what comes up. Well, obviously, maybe that was one place we don't get to go at this time in space. But the point is that it was exciting, Tom. I got to tell you something. You know how you do a lot of work, you do a lot of research and stuff, but you know when there comes someone into your life that just refreshes it? That's how David was. He was a refreshing voice, a brilliant, brilliant friend, but also someone whose absolute love and adoration for Jesus Christ was, in my opinion, unparalleled. He really did walk the walk, talk the talk, and he really is everything we're making him out to be. No embellishment, but look, the Bible does say, give honor to whom honor is due, and the man needs to be honored, not ripped off, plagiarized. And I personally don't talk to some Christian authors because, look, when they rip off me or rip you off, Tom, and stuff, what they're doing is they're not understanding so many times the Spirit. Oh, listen, research, we all draw on ancient writers' research and stuff, but when you paid a price for 40 years to come to the understanding, and then all of a sudden somebody goes and claims that as their own, I got to tell you, I understand. You turn the other cheek, but you just don't let it go unnoticed to the one who deserves credit. We're talking about David, so I'm excited to see the complete works, and I'm really excited. By the way, as the publisher of Cydonia, I can tell you this. I've personally seen those things sell on Amazon. And actually, somebody sent me a screenshot of it. I think the highest one I ever saw was $1,100 or $1,200, and guess what? It sold. Even when I was a publisher, and I think I have 2 dozen or 3 dozen of the originals left, and they were spoken for. But, you know, the point is that you're going to get the best of two worlds. And I think the thing that sticks out about my mind, or above my mind in everything that he wrote in the center of, Temple at the Center of Time, was the distance between, obviously, Jerusalem and Mecca. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm, yes.
It was 666, wasn't it, statute miles?
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now we're dealing with, I think, Tom, you were posting on Raiders News, is the Antichrist going to be a Muslim? Or is it going to be a Muslim? And here's the one. The last time you and I did the show, I got so much flack. I never shared the joy of it with you. But when somebody said Islam and Catholicism could never merge. Well, we're told in the Bible, for all those, how should we say this, emotionally challenged people, that they are going to merge because there's going to be a one-world religion, and the kings of the earth are going to give their power unto the beast. Such a simple thing, but yet it escapes everyone. And I don't think that as the days grow darker and the days grow more perilous, and given where the United States is now compared to most of where our grandparents and our parents, my parents, your parents, where all of our parents were at, I mean, this ain't the same old country. And I wrote, we're no longer in Kansas anymore. And unfortunately, the ruby red slippers don't click, and we don't get to go back to Kansas and get out of Oz. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will keep you informed. The minute it's available, or within 2 weeks, the publisher, obviously Tom will have it on his website. You can order it from him. You can order it from me. The proceeds will be, and we'll define it up front. And what we're waiting for is our final cost. This is going to be a big book, Tom.
Yeah, it's going to be a big book, and but I'm hopeful that within a couple of weeks, I'm going to be on the road for a couple of weeks. I'm working on this documentary film on transhumanism, so we'll be on the road for a couple of weeks. If we get back, will be the launch of Petrus Romanus, and I can already tell that I'm going to be just swamped doing media. But thankfully, the Lord has blessed me in that I have a staff that work for me full time. And so basically all I have to do is just, be the answer guy. They pick up the phone, they give it to me in yes and no's, and I sit and hold the phone and say yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. So nothing that I'm doing with Petrus Romanus will hold up the project for the David Flynn collection. And actually, the cover designer already has. We were waiting to get the book that you sent me. I had to get a copy of it. They're going to scan a high-res copy of the front cover of Sidonia because they're going to use, both books are going to be on the front cover of the new book, plus some other information, and hopefully a picture of David Flynn. But we'll figure all that out. As soon as I get the first draft, I'll send it to you. What do you think, Steve? What do we want to change? What do we want to tweak? But that shouldn't take us very long, and then Daniel Wright, the cover designer, he'll get that thing done quick. We'll get all the files over to the printer, and right now the printer is turning stuff around pretty fast. About 4 weeks from the time they get the files, we have books. So that's why I'm assuming that, probably hopefully sometime around June, we'll have this new book, and it's going to be a terrific collector's item for anybody that ever cared anything about David and who now want to celebrate this wonderful gift that God gave us in this man, and also be able to contribute something in support of his kids. They're going to have the opportunity to do it. So it's a wonderful idea. I couldn't be more excited about it. I'm glad to be working with you on it, Steve. And like you said, when we get ready to do the print run, you just say how many copies you want. I'll add some copies, and it'll also be in distribution, so people will be able to buy it through the stores if they want to. But the ones that they buy directly from me and directly from you, there will be a contribution that will go into that memorial fund for the support of his kids. Now, another thing that David did to get back on you want to get back now on this?
Yeah, let's get back on that, because I'm going to ask you this. I want you to know I'm going to ask you a question. Did you, at this point in time, your original thought and everything that Chris put together, have you guys changed your mind on who Petrus Romanus will be? Or do you think it's still hidden?
Well, I have my suspicions, and it'll be published in the book. But I'm telling you that since I'm not a member of the College of Cardinals, I'm not a part of the Roman Curia, I'm not hedging for any particular reason other than I'm not a part of that occult society, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And there are some very strange things that are going on that we've only been able to put part of our finger on. But here's the bottom line. People aren't going to have to wait very long. Benedict hinted that he might retire as soon as next month. Now, I don't think he's going to, by the way. I think I have reasons to believe it's going to happen later on this year. But the point is, it's most likely going to happen in the year 2012. And that's what the Rene Thibault, the mathematician we already talked about, the Jesuit code breaker, that's the year that he determined 61 years ago that the final conclave would occur in the year 2012. So we're going to find out if these Catholic mystics, if these various prophecies, everything from the prophecies of the end of the Mayan calendar, all the rest of it, we're going to find out. But there is something very, very strange going on with the year 2012 that includes a whole lot more than the rollover of the Mayan calendar. And it very much seems connected to the prophecy of the popes, to the arrival of Petrus Romanus, to the arrival of the Antichrist. People who didn't listen to that first show ought to get it and listen to it, because we pointed out how it's not just a 900-year-old Catholic prophecy. So imagine a prophecy that goes almost halfway back to the time of Christ. this long prophecy that foresaw all of these different popes, and the very next pope following Pope Benedict XVI is the final one on the list, Petrus Romanus, the false prophet. He helps give rise to the Antichrist. And you look at Pope Benedict right now, he seems like they're squeezing the last little bit out of him, if you will. They're sending him everywhere. He went to Cuba. He's going to go to other places, but he's being rolled around on a cart. He can't go up. He's got to be carried up stairways. He's getting feeble. The Vatican's own newspaper has stated just a few weeks ago that he seems to be worn out. Well, he's old, right? And some people handle age better than others. And the Vatican's own newspaper also said as a result of that the College of Cardinals right now are preparing for the conclave that is going to elect his successor. And anybody listening to this show, and we'll have a lot of Roman Catholics listening to it, we might have people out of the Vatican listening to it, are aware that what I'm saying is it's really not news. I mean, it's being published everywhere, but that those are facts. Now, could Benedict continue to be the Pope on into 2013, 2014? Well, anything's possible, but it's not probable. And the prophecies, definitely, of occult sources have said that it's going to happen in the year 2012. It's not just the prophecy of the popes. We talked in that last broadcast about the Zohar. 700 years ago, Jewish priests, Orthodox priests, prophesying when their Messiah would appear. And they said it in the year 5773 in the Jewish calendar, which in our Gregorian calendar begins in the new moon this September. Now imagine that. 700 years ago, they prophesied when their Messiah would appear, and they said it for September of 2012. But given the fact that they rejected Jesus as their Messiah, Christians would understand their prophecy as heralding the arrival of the Antichrist, right, in the year 2012. And so then we talked about all the other things. The Mayan calendar ends in 2012. The Aztec calendar ends in 2012. The Cherokee Indian ends in 2012. Mayan inscriptions in two different places. They just found a new one where it talks about the Mayan underworld god Bolan Yakteku, which actually sounds like an alien invasion because it talks about all these motherships or whatever, these what's called support gods, but these giant things descending very quickly to the earth. That's in the Mayan inscriptions. That's going to happen in the year 2012. The Hindu Kali Yuga calendar ends in the year 2012. And then we talked about how Jonathan Edwards, America's most important, original philosophical theologian, the greatest intellectual, how he predicted two things. Really, that the Antichrist will appear in the year 2012, but he will break his covenant with the Jews in 2016. So now all of a sudden we have two dates that appear to be important. One is 2012, one is 2016. And there's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about in the last show that's related to that. For instance, June 21, 2016 is exactly 3.5 years, the midst of the week, after the end of the Mayan ending date, December 21st, 2012. But that's the same date that marks the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, when a cusp line is created between Gemini and Cancer. And if you read David Oveson's book, The Secret Architect of Our Nation's Capital, he refers to that date as having very deep astrological significance to the founding and the secret destiny of America. So there's a great deal more here. Also really important to recognize that based on Daniel chapter 9 and the related text, scholars believe that a period of 70 years, or a biblical generation, will elapse between the reformation of Israel as a nation and the return of Jesus Christ. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? When 70 years is added to 1948, the year that Israel was formally recognized as an independent nation by the United States, it brings us through the year 2018, which means that the year 2019, exactly 7 years after 2012, would mark the year that Jesus Christ returns with the armies of heaven to establish his rule over the earth. So is all of this what is all of this, Steve? I mean, there seems to be a concatenation of events that are unfolding, that are involved with the year 2012, that are mathematically impossible. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I understand simple stuff like, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times. There's a point where pretty soon you hit the exponential curve, and those numbers, those probabilities go into the stratosphere, and we've only scratched the surface. If you read the book Apollyon Rising 2012, you find out that actually the most remarkable connection, the year 2012 for me in that book, was how the Maya directly linked the years 1776 and 2000.
Hey, Tom?
Yes.
Tom, hold on. Something's garbling you. Could you repeat that? You just garbled really bad.
You did earlier, too, so I sound okay
Steve
now?
And, Tom, it's probably an hour in, Steve. What I need to do is refresh the Skype connection.
Okay.
Everything is going on tape, though, so there'll be no garbling there.
Okay.
Tom, why don't we do this? If you all will both give me exactly 2 minutes, that'll allow me to refresh the connection.
Okay.
And, Steve, I'm going to dial you right back.
It's the top of the hour at 10. You want to just take a break?
Hey, perfect timing. It's right on the money. So let's take a break. And,
okay.
Steve, I'll dial you back. We'll be back in about 5 or 6 minutes, folks. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Omega Man Radio. We'll be right back.
Well, Tom, before we went and got interrupted by the breakdown in Skype or whatever, I want to give you the time to finish out your thought. It didn't seem like we were there.
Well, I think I was getting on kind of a roll. That's when you get anointed, that old saying, it's amazing what you'll say when you get anointed. But much of the research in Apollyon Rising 2012, that's the point that I was going to make, it's kind of like part one of Petrus Romanus. If you read the book Petrus Romanus, and if you have read the book Apollyon Rising 2012, you'll kind of see the connection between part one and part two, in that this book, in many ways, of course, it breaks a lot of fresh new ground, but in many ways it kind of picks up where we left off in that book. But the most remarkable connection to the year 2012 in the book Apollyon Rising 2012 was how the Maya had recognized that there was a direct link between the 2 years, 1776 and 2012, in a way that, if you will recall, Steve, you and I talked about this a couple of years ago, that Richard Luxton, who was the academic that had interpreted the Book of the Kumeyaw, the Council Book of the Yucatec Maya, from the 1500s, it was what he put in his personal notations on Katun 13 Ehu. He wrote this, and I grabbed it while we were on this break. He wrote this. He wrote, quote, "The dates that accompany the illustrations approximate real counts. Katun 13 Ehu began in the colonial count 1776, and the end of the Eastern Katun cycle in 13 Ehu is intermingled here with elements of the Christian Last Judgment. Whether this paradigm was also intended for the end of the long count in 2012 is open to question," end quote. And when I first found that years ago, I found that that statement is what then caused me to begin communicating to different Bible scholars and asking them, do you know of any direct connection between the Great Seal of the United States of America and the year 2012? And the reason I was asking that is when I saw this connection between 1776 and 2012 and the 13-stepped countdown, the Katun 13 Ehu, immediately what happened was the Great Seal of the United States jumped into my mind, where at the base of a 13-stepped pyramid you have the year 1776, over which is hovering the all-seeing eye of Apollo. Now, we're not going to talk about that. By the way, if people want to know more about that and that conversation, Steve Quayle and I did, I forget how many hours on that very subject. It is still over there on the website, ApollonRising.com or ApollonRising2012.com. And if you go over there, you'll find the website that Steve and I did. And what's ironic, Steve, is there's a quote down there from David Flynn talking about how he thought it was one of the best shows he had ever heard. So isn't that ironic? But people can go over there and they can listen all about that and find out all about that. But the point I was making before the break is that there's something super unusual about 2012, and most people really don't get it. I mean, they think that it just has something to do with the end of the Mayan calendar. That's really just a freckle on the blueprint of what's really unfolding, and how many different ancient societies, some of which we mentioned before the break, some of which we could talk about at some other point, but in addition to that, consider that in 2012 the United States will elect a new president, hopefully a new one, maybe re-elect the same one, and Michael Savage says if we re-elect Obama, it'll be our last president. In 2012, the United Nations gets new leaders. 2012, Petrus Romanus is supposed to materialize. It wasn't also, by the way, it wasn't just Jonathan Edwards, but there were other early century writers like Reverend William J. Reed, who something like 130 or 40 years ago wrote his book Lectures on the Revelation concerning the papal system, and he wrote, we are prepared to answer the question, when will the papal system come to an end? It will be destroyed in the year 2012. So what in the world, Steve? Why were so many individuals, most of them of an occultic nature, these others like Jonathan Edwards and Reverend Reed and others of Christians who would have been inspired by the Holy Spirit, why were they so fixated that in the year 2012, several things were going to happen? One, there would be distress among the nations. Secondly, there would be the coming of a messianic figure, the Antichrist, a false Christ who would appear, the arrival of the false prophet. And by the way, many of these cultures, on a different subject you and I have also covered numerous times, also talked about this being followed by the emergence of a new enlightened form of humanity. And when you look at, for instance, the prophecy of the Cumae Sibyl, the Novus Ordo Seclorum on the Great Seal of the United States, she specifically talks about a new golden age in which once again the gods will be commingled with mankind. She's talking about a reintroduction of Watcher/Nephilim/Gibborim activity happening upon the earth. And if you read Apollyon Rising 2012, you'll see that that's dated to occur in the year 2012. Then you have Rene Thibault, the code breaker, saying that it's going to happen in the year 2012. Anyway, the list is spooky. It's not just the Maya. They're only one small part of a much bigger picture that goes back into thousands of years of occult societies, looking forward to one event horizon, Steve, and they targeted the year 2012 in a way that's, I agree with the professor that interpreted the book of the Kumiel, Richard, that it seems to smack of the Christian final judgment prophecies, the book of Revelation, the books of Daniel, the prophetic texts that tell us a time would come when a false prophet would appear, a false Christ would appear. The world is going to accept them as their messianic figure. The non-religious will just see them as heroes, if you will, political figures who are going to solve all of our issues. Religious people are going to accept them, and it is going to be both the Islamic community and the Vatican, the Catholic community, and much of the evangelical community. They are going to accept this individual as their coming Messiah. Now, the thing I loved about David Flynn is where a guy like me could do a tremendous amount of research, and I'm blessed to have people that I can, put on task to do research for me. And I hope that it doesn't sound like what I'm saying is my research is superficial. But compared to David Flynn, a lot of people's research is superficial. Because what Flynn did was he looked past the surface information. He looked past even these various occult sources and societies to find what was the source of the Mayan, the Aztec, the etc. Where was their knowledge coming from? which then also would tie to the true source of the ET, UFO, abduction phenomenon, information coming out of the Vatican. But what's really behind it? I think that's one of the things that really drove him is what is the source, right? Where's it coming from? Who's inspiring all of this? So somebody prophesied. So what? What was behind it? And you may have read recently one of the entries on Raiders News Update into the Petrus Romanus series. And by the way, you said a moment ago, Steve, that chapter 17 was up. Well, actually, these are not the chapters in the book. This is just a lot of material based on research in the book.
Right, and I apologize for that. I was excuse me. I'm glad you made that clear because, again, you do this typically when you bring out a book. You put so much cool information that I call that wetting the whistle stops.
Well, a lot of it is because you'd be amazed how many people email us and they'll say something like, I can't even afford to buy the book. So we try to put just a ton of information out there that can help people. On the other hand, the Lord has instructed us to be good stewards, and I have people whose life depends on me being able to pay their salary. So there also is a stage at which I have to be able to function. You've probably heard these people in the past that have said, well, if you were really a man of God, you'd just give it all away free. And the answer to that is, yeah, I'd do that for a few weeks, and then everybody that works for me and depends on me and myself, we'd be bankrupt, out of business, and we wouldn't be able to share another thing with you because it takes revenue to be able to function, right?
Oh, yeah, I don't think, Tom, I don't think people understand. Literally, when you do a website, I mean, you pay for everything. And I remember one day adding up the money I'd spent on just talk radio because it wasn't always gifted or gratis. When I was on shortwave, it was like $75, $85 but when you get up to $750,000 for 20 years, not
right.
counting your website, and my website costs somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 to maintain, and then that's not even counting all the times I would take trips and stuff. And I don't ask, I want to share something. I've got I believe some of the neatest listeners in the world. Because I do, and when I'm able, I give a lot of books away. But I know there are people, when I hear that, if you were really a Christian, I basically want to say, what in the Hades do you do? Well, if they're on the Internet, they can at least afford the Internet. If they're emailing me their, convulsive requests. And one guy basically said, I got more important things to spend my money on your book, but it sounds interesting. I sent him back an email and said, no, thank you. Your heart's not ready, and your mind certainly isn't. And I'm serious about that, okay? Now, look, I've given, and I'm not saying whoopee, but it's just I say to any veteran, they can have my book, and I'm not speaking for you on this. I'm just speaking for myself. But even then, one lady got mad at me. She says, I don't care how much money and books you give away. You're an angry man. Well, so is God. He's angry at sin every day. And I think that, we've got such an explosive. I'm sitting here going, okay, we've got 2012, 2019. Let me make it clear to everyone. I think you just said it. It's a freckle, the Mayan calendar. There are thousands, if not 10,000, ancient arcane writings, all pointing out. And Tom, my contention is the fallen angels. Not only if you really go almost word for word in the book of Enoch or in Hanok, and I've got one of a really good translation by a very brilliant man who gave me permission to reprint it for my listeners. The point that I think people have got to understand. Let me give you a good example. MySpace and Facebook. You know what that was called in Star Trek East? That's the Borg. And a very prominent man who's now dead, brilliant beyond, and at one time associated with Majestic. And if you don't know what Majestic is, go Google it. He said, Steve, he said, where do you think the ultimate control lies? And I said, with he who not only develops. He said, no, it's not he who develops it, it's he who controls it. And he maintained, Tom, now listen to this, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but he said that the whole, you're going to love this, the whole social networking, especially in virtual reality, was an alien, not meaning foreign to the boundaries of the United States, but not of this planet. It was, if you will, the ultimate web to snare everybody into the hive, H-I-V-E. For the record, the word hive exists in special operations terminology for the giants that are in stasis, and I've talked about good night, Dr. Moldeshev, who has seen them, and all the different people that have viewed them. I've had people in my office, and they said it's interesting. He said it's a simultaneous sharing of a command that goes out. It's like, if you will, an alien mind-melting neural network. Am I being clear? Does that come across clear enough?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is how so much of the presentations, you know, I've been traveling the U.S. this year, going to these different conferences, and they want me to talk about what's happening now with neural networking, actually the whole hive mind issue, the approach of strong artificial intelligence, how we're going to create systems that will allow the brain to be integrated with strong artificial intelligence systems, what the state of the future from the Millennium Project is saying, you know, all these, what the Jasons are saying to the Department of Defense, and it sounds very much like what you're talking about right now. That on the near landscape, there is a moment in which we are going to be integrated with machine intelligence, but there won't be any coming back from it. And so then you have to question, what does that even mean? If we won't even be human anymore as we understand it today, but what are the implications of it?